The topic of the day is course alignment, part 2 of a 3-part series. The first part we talked about creating objectives, and also a little bit about the learner-centered syllabus. Today we are focusing on taking those objectives and aligning them with our assessment and also with our instruction. So our objectives, we want to describe the concept and importance of course alignment. We're going to use the UbD, or the Understanding by Design model, to facilitate course alignment. And then within that, or to accomplish that, we're going to be using some course mapping templates and some other tools that I'll share with you that I've used in my own experience. So there's kind of 3 parts to what we're going to be doing. The first part is the concept map skeleton. So throughout the presentation, we'll kind of be going back and forth from PowerPoint to the concept map and kind of filling that out. And then there's also the guided notes that are really just more for you to have something that's one sheet that's not a whole lot of stuff that you can kind of keep filed away under course alignment, so you can have kind of a quick reference guide of what all we talked about throughout the session. So before we actually get into the presentation, let's just actually go ahead and take a look at this concept map and just kind of review a little bit of what we talked about in the first session, so that if you did not come to that session, you'll kind of be somewhat caught up, and then also kind of frame everything that we're going to talk about today. So what we have here is, if you'll notice, the entire concept map is contained within this Understanding by Design framework, right? So that's what I mentioned earlier, the UbD framework. And that's really the tool or the framework that we're going to kind of use to accomplish course alignment. So the UbD framework starts with big picture ideas, right? What's the most important, medium important, and least important things that you want your students to get out of your course, right? So these 2 are usually going to go into our course objectives, and then the last 2 will really kind of filter in to the module level objectives. Course objectives are more broad, whereas the module objectives are more specific, right? I want less of the course objectives and more of the module objectives. These are more geared towards your affective goals, right? I want my students to understand and appreciate, develop sympathy for, develop empathy for, those type things. It would be best served in this category of course objectives. Whereas your module objectives, this is an acronym for specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and timely. Right, so a pretty big difference between these 2 objectives. We want to make sure that the biggest part of this in terms of course alignment is that your module objectives are supporting your course objectives. Right, so that's why I have more of these, and they're more specific. Right, so this is my broad. So for every 1 course objective, I'll probably have 4 or 5 module objectives that would support it. And then specifically what we talked about last time was taking these module objectives and classifying them with a taxonomy. We're going to use Bloom's. There's also other taxonomies. These are fairly popular. Bloom's is by far the most popular that's used. But some examples of how these can be used can be found in one of the PDFs that I shared with you. I believe the name of that is Course Alignment Tools, and that is one of the PDFs that I shared in that zip folder. So that kind of gets you up to speed on what we looked at in part 1. So kind of the big takeaway that I wanted participants to get from part 1 was that it's really not about the finished product with the learning objectives. It's more about the process of actually defining those learning objectives. So it's more about the journey than it is the destination. And what you'll find is that's also the case with course alignment. The knowledge that you gain of your own course throughout this course alignment process, even if you've been teaching the same course for 20 years, if you take yourself through this process, you'll see your course from different perspectives. You'll have new ideas, and it's really more about the journey than it is the destination. So there's really two main aspects of course alignment, and the easiest way for me to think about this is in terms of puzzle pieces. So the first big domain of course alignment is what I refer to as completion, right? So completion would be, do you have all the necessary components of the course, right? Do you have course objectives? Do you have module objectives? Do you have assessments? Do you have instruction? Do you have opportunities for interaction? Do you have all of these components just there, right? Are they present in the course? And then the second big picture with course alignment is cohesion, right? So you've got, do you have all the pieces, and then do all the pieces actually fit together? So the do all the pieces fit together, that's really what the UbD framework is going to help us out with. So what is the UbD framework? Okay, so this is the most general description of what the UbD framework is. It's really a 3-step process, more or less, and it's also referred to as backwards design by many people, because you're starting with your objectives and working back from there. I've always kind of operated that way anyway, so it's somewhat odd for me for this to be called backwards design, because it makes pretty logical sense to me. But so that is your first step, right? That's what we talked about in the first session. Was we want to identify our objectives. What are the results that I want to get out of this course? What do I want the students to understand and be able to do? Then your second step is to determine assessment evidence. So when I went through this process personally, it was kind of an aha moment for me when I really started thinking about this in terms of evidence instead of just what assessments am I going to use, right? So that was kind of the way I had approached it historically in my own teaching, was what assessment am I going to use, not what are the things that they're going to do and say and show me on paper or in presentations specifically. What are these things? What do they look like, right? What are they going to be able to show me? And from that, it makes it a lot easier to plan learning experiences, right? That's another kind of aha moment for me, was when I moved to this third step, which is our instruction portion. Instead of thinking in terms of just, here's a list of instructional strategies, let me pick which ones I feel like fit my personality best and kind of fit the situation. For me, just thinking of it in terms of learning experiences instead of picking out instructional strategies really kind of helped me. And those two things together, thinking of the assessment in terms of evidence and thinking of the instruction in terms of experience, I found that to be extremely helpful personally. So let's get back to the the concept map just for a second here. Right, so we've got our evidence that I was just talking about right up here. So where do we get this evidence from, and then what do we do with it? Well, the evidence really is going to be dictated from this process, right? Going through this process is going to really, really help me in being able to come up with the evidence, right? So it's really your module objectives, but more specifically this process that will dictate what you end up with as evidence. And then once I come up with this, my assessments will emerge from that. Right, so evidence is dictated by module objectives. More specifically, this process is really going to help you out with it. And then my assessments are going to emerge from that evidence. These assessments are meant to measure my module objectives. And what I found in my experience is that, again, with not picking, I spoke earlier about instead of thinking about picking out instructional strategies, thinking of it in terms of learning experiences. I found that once I defined this evidence, there was lots of ideas that started coming to mind that weren't necessarily going to be found on any list of assessment strategies. It was just things that, I came up with kind of on my own. And going through this whole process to the point where we get here, where we have defined this evidence, that's what allows these unique assessments to be created from that. And this is going to be different for everybody. It's really, when I was in the classroom and I would have professional development sessions, what I wanted was for somebody to come in and say, this is the best way to do this, and this is the assessment you need to use in this situation, and this instructional strategy goes well with this assessment. And to a certain extent, you can do that. But there's such a, variety of content here, and such a variety in instructors, views of teaching and learning, that it's really hard to say, cut and dry, use this in this situation. So it's really going to depend on your personal preferences, your personal philosophy of teaching and learning, kind of what kind of assessment you want to use in what scenarios. Are you more of a behaviorist, where you are going to plan for lots of repetition, or are you more of a cognitivist, where you're going to have more graphic organizers, concept maps, things of that nature? Or are you more of a constructivist, where you're going to have lots of group work and lots of, going and doing and up and around the room and, partner work, that type stuff. So there's really three main types of assessment. You've got assessment of learning, assessment for learning, and assessment as learning. With assessment of learning, this is what we generally refer to as summative assessment. Right? So you've got tests, quizzes. It's usually going to be, at the end of a module or a unit. These are your essays, your projects, your portfolios, your standardized assessments. They're very high stakes, and like I said, usually at the end of a unit or a module, or at the end of a semester, things of that nature. You've got assessment for learning, which is generally referred to as formative assessment, and in my opinion, this is really the most crucial, the most essential type of assessment, because it informs instruction, right? The information that I get from formative assessment determines how I proceed from that point out, right? You have your best laid plan ready, and then you get into class and you do some sort of activity with a formative assessment built in, and the feedback that you get from those activities is going to possibly drastically alter how you move forward from there. If you had assumed that students would really, really struggle with something and they don't, then that's going to impact how you move forward from there. And the other side of that spectrum is true as well. It also, provides students with feedback more readily than summative assessment. These are those moments when, you've got them in groups doing something, and you walk by and you have those, little short 30-second to 90-second chats with them, and you give them, real-time feedback on what's going on. So formative assessment, super, super important. Assessment as learning, this is really where we're teaching students how to self-assess, right? So this is helping them to set goals and then monitor them and achieving those goals. You've got to model these skills for them. These are not things that they're just going to kind of pick up. You really kind of have to show them exemplars and examples of successful self-assessment techniques and things of that nature. And it is extremely important that this is included at least in a small amount, because it does lead to self-awareness and self-directed learning and improved study habits, things of that nature. So within these three types of assessment, as we progress throughout the course, the designers of the UbD framework have provided 6 facets of understanding that we want to try and hit. Okay, so I'm not going to take the time to read through all those completely, but what I do want to point out is the similarities that you see here. Explain, interpret, apply. These are verbs that are very, very commonly associated with the different levels of Bloom's taxonomy. So you can see where classifying your objectives using Bloom's and then using this understanding by design framework can it really starts to kind of coalesce together, and the concepts of Bloom's and the concepts of the UbD model really kind of fit together very, very well. Again, you've got demonstrating perspective by seeing the big picture, being empathetic, having self-knowledge. So these would be the upper level or the higher order thinking skills that we see with Bloom's. Whereas the explain, interpret, and apply, those are going to be your bottom or lower order thinking skills. So it really does align very well. 6 facets of understanding. There are 6 levels of Bloom's hierarchy of cognitive function. So you can see where that starts to align fairly well. Right, so for assessment, we have 3 types. All right, so let's kind of go up high here so we can fit all 3 of them in. All right, so the first one that we talked about was assessment of learning. Right, this was our summative assessment. Then we have assessment for learning. This is formative. And then we have assessment as learning. And I'm going to call this metacognitive. Metacognition is thinking about one's own thinking. So we've got summative, formative, and metacognitive in terms of assessment. Some things that we want to consider, some questions we want to ask ourselves. What kind of stakes do we want to be attached to our assessments? You always want to think about, what is it going to be? Low stakes, high stakes? How much is it going to factor into their grade? Are you even going to grade it? You want to always close the loop, which means giving feedback. Rubrics and exemplars are always great ideas. Giving the students examples of previous successful work and then giving them very detailed criteria that they need to meet. Both of those are always good ideas. And then, see if I can fit this in here. We talked about those 6 facets of understanding that we want to try and hit. Not necessarily, with each assessment do you want to try to hit all 6 of those facets, but definitely throughout the course of the semester, right? Within all of the assessments that you give within a course, you want to hit all of those. The same way that, over here with our objectives, we want to vary the cognitive levels that those objectives measure. Not necessarily, within one module do I want to have all 6 cognitive levels, but definitely within the course, I want to have from the remember all the way to the create on Bloom's covered in my objectives. In the same way that we had three different types of assessment, we also have really 3 different aims or 3 different what's the word I'm looking for? 3 different approaches, I guess, to instruction. And the 3 approaches here are acquiring knowledge, right? Instruction that leads to the acquisition of knowledge, instruction that leads to the meaning-making structures of knowledge, and then instruction that leads to the transfer of knowledge. And all of these are pointed to transfer because that is our ultimate goal with instruction, right? We want them to be able to take concepts that they've learned in our class and then apply them to new, unique situations, right? I don't want them to just be able to solve a 2-step equation on a worksheet that I gave them. I want them to be able to take the concepts that are embedded in being able to solve a 2-step equation and apply that in a science class or a art class or in real world settings of some sort. So with acquisition, our goal here is to help them acquire factual information, right? This is usually done through direct instruction. This is where most of us have our what I like to call bread and butter instructional strategy, right? Lecture for most of us is where we like to hang out because it's easy to get up and it's easy to get up and talk about what you know about, right? And that's what we like to do. We like to talk about the things that we know, and we like to talk about the things that we're passionate about. That's why we are content experts in the first place, because we were passionate about this at some point and decided, hey, I want to spend my educational career learning about this subject matter that I'm passionate about. So it makes sense that we would enjoy getting up and talking about this. And I'm not saying that there's anything wrong with that. What I am saying is that there are things that you can do within a lecture to make it more than just being up in front of people talking at them, right? So you can use concept maps, you can use graphic organizers, you can use guided notes, you can use fill-in-the-blank notes. Within those guided notes, do lots of color coding. I know for me personally, my bread and butter was always lecture with guided notes and a lot of color coding. So let me show you just an example of what I'm talking about. Right, so this is some guided notes that I used years back. Right, so essentially, this was a lecture instructional strategy because I'm just up in front of the room with a PowerPoint and working example problems, right? But the students have these notes to kind of keep them engaged. There's lots of color coding going on. So, there's things that we can do to take lecture and make it more than just lecture, right? So nothing wrong with it, but how long would you want to sit and listen to someone talk? You're probably tired of listening to me talk at this point. So, try to work in some different things when you lecture. There's got to be lecture. There has to be, because there's got to be acquisition of facts and information and basic skills, right? And really the best way to do that is direct instruction. So it has to be a part of what we do, but it needs to be more than just a person standing at the front of the room talking. Then we have make meaning, which is our goal here is to help them come to understandings, right? So this is group work, partner work, Socratic seminars, which is basically intentional question asking, right? So you kind of think about the questions that you're going to ask beforehand, have those well-constructed, open-ended questions, well thought out, really just kind of a class discussion type stuff, right? Which, again, most of us are fairly good at this as well. We just don't do enough of it, right? Because a lot of times you'll get those classes where students just don't really want to participate, and I've been there and dealt with that. But you just have to keep plugging away. If you set your expectation as this is what we're going to do, and you're expected to participate, and then even further than that, here's a rubric that spells out for you how I expect you to participate and how you're going to be graded on that participation, then I'm fairly confident that if you set those expectations, that by the third, fourth class meeting, your participation will probably be better than it was in that first class meeting. And then the goal of what we're doing here is transfer of knowledge, right? We want them to be able to take their learning and effectively apply it in new situations or in new contexts, right? So this is where the one-on-one kind of conferencing, the prompting of self-assessment, really that assessment as learning component comes in here, and you really become more of a coach than a teacher at this point, because this is for me, this was the hardest part of being a teacher, was always wanting to take the pencil out of their hand and do it for them, right? But when we're in the early stages, that possibly is okay, but once we get to the point of needing them to be able to transfer this information, at some point you have to stop taking the pencil out of their hand and let them do it for themselves. But this is our focus. Everything that we're doing is leading to the students having the ability to transfer knowledge to new situations. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is kind of go back. Well, actually, let me just tell you what we'll do, and then we'll do it. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to finish up our concept map here, add a few things to instruction, and then I'm going to kind of walk you through my process, my UbD process that I went through in developing a course for new faculty that will be teaching online. And I'm not done developing the course yet, but I have been using this framework as I move along. And so I think it would be beneficial to you just to kind of see, how someone else has approached this process, and kind of the tools that I've used to take this concept and these theories and kind of put them into practice. It was always, helpful for me to see how other people took things and kind of put them into their own practice. And so each one of these that you see here in yellow, the MLOs, that's module level objectives. CLO is course level objectives. So anything that you see in yellow means that I have shared a resource with you to be able to accomplish this. So if you see something throughout this process that like a template or a chart that you like, then I've already shared that with you. And all of these that are in yellow, again, these are areas throughout the process where I've used a template of some sort. Okay, so again, we'll finish up this concept map, and then we will walk through my process. I'm going to, again, kind of do this three-pronged deal up here up top. And we've got this would be acquisition. This is meaning making. And this is transfer. Right, and I'm going to put a box around transfer because, like we said, this is our goal. This is where we want to concentrate. So what we're trying to get our students to be able to do is to transfer the concepts that we're giving them to new situations. So some things to consider with instruction. Don't be afraid to fail. I used to tell my students this all the time. Don't be afraid to make mistakes. Don't be afraid to fail. And then it occurred to me that I was not practicing what I preached, right? I had my little toolkit of things that I was really good at, and I did those really well, and I just continued to do those, which for a lot of students that worked out well for, but for some of them, not so much. And I was hesitant to do anything else because there was a possibility of failure there, right? I know that I do this good, so I'm going to keep doing this. I don't know that if I try some other type of strategy that it's going to go very well. But you've got to embrace that failure and try new things, and it's going to happen that if you try enough new things, eventually you're going to fail. I promise you, you're not going to be good at every single thing you ever do. But that gives you an opportunity to model for your students how to handle that failure, right? When you fall flat on your face, and it's not a fun thing to do. I've been there. It's not a fun thing to do at all. But again, it presents an opportunity for you to model for them how to react and how to deal with failure. We want to I'll just say interaction, right? We want to have as many opportunities for interaction as possible, both between students and teachers, between students and each other, right? So we want lots of interaction, and we want experiences, right? We want learning experiences. And again, these two things, the evidence and the experiences, conceptualizing things in this way, for me, was extremely helpful. Okay, so maybe you put, a couple of stars by these two things. Because for me, those two things were extremely helpful. Instruction prepares our students for assessment. The assessment measures the module objectives. The module objectives support the course level objectives. And then lastly, with our assessment and our instruction, we want to always let our personal style and preferences kind of shine through. And we want to appropriately use technology. And what I mean by that is don't use technology just for the sake of using technology, right? We have a lot of different instructional technologies available to us here, which is great. Not everybody has all of those things available to them. But don't use something just for the sake of using it, right? Follow this process. Get your course planned out. What kind of assessments am I going to use? What kind of instructional experiences am I going to create? And then what kind of tech can lend itself to making those easier or more engaging or more interactive rather. So don't force the technology onto things just because you have it does not necessarily mean that you need to be using it. Use it where it's appropriate, both in your assessment and in your instruction. The course that I am developing right now, again, is one for new faculty, and then I believe anyone that teaches online is going to have to go through this training. I think like every 3 to 5 years, something like that. Which we've already got that. There's already an online educator training, so we're just kind of revamping it, so to speak. So going back to this UbD framework, right? The enduring understanding, important to know, important to be familiar with. I didn't really follow that exactly, really more or less because I discovered this framework after I was already well into the beginning parts of creating this course. But I still kind of encompass that with the way that I started here. So I literally just sat down and started with some goals. And from those goals, I developed a rough overview and then made all of these "I want you to" statements, right? So at this point, I'm literally just kind of stream of consciousness typing things, or actually writing them. I went back later and typed them up. But just kind of the things that are coming to my head, right? And I take my goals and I take these statements, and from that, I begin to develop my course overview and my course level objectives, right? So, maybe 3 of these statements would be combined into one of these. And then once you have your course level objectives, then you start to say, okay, well, what am I going to do to support these course level objectives, right? So as you're writing your module level objectives, you always want to have these in front of you and be asking yourself, is this objective meeting the course objectives that I've laid out? And if it's not, then I either need to change it, rewrite it, or I need to add a course level objective, right? So if I end up with something at the module level, that's very specific and is measuring a very specific skill, and then I come back up here and I say, well, it doesn't really fit any of these, then you need a new course level learning objective and probably a couple more module level objectives to go along with that. So going back to the 2 pieces of course alignment, right? We talked about you've got do you have all the components there, and then are they cohesive, right? So do I have all the puzzle pieces, and then do the puzzle pieces fit together? So this is really the do I have all the puzzle pieces, right? And the best way to know for sure that you have them all and that each one of your course level objectives is being measured is to map them out, right? So this is, if you're referring back to the PowerPoint slide, this is the CLO to MLO map, the course level objective to module level objective map. So across the top, I have my 8 course level objectives, right? So I take these 8 objectives and I cut and paste them here. Then as you go down, right, module 1, learning theory with your module level objectives, right? And at this point, I've already got this document, right? So all I'm doing is taking my module 1 learning theory objectives and cutting and pasting them into this course map, right? And I do this for all of my modules. And I go down and I say, okay, this module level objective is supporting which ones of my course level objectives, and I put X's where the support is, right? So as we go through, you can flip through this and see where there's holes in your support, right? Which ones of your course level objectives are not being supported either at all or much more so maybe than some of your other course level objectives, right? So you can kind of watch these X's as we go through the modules begin to move across the page, right? Because I'm supporting these course level objectives with this module, and then my next module is going to support more here, and then more so to the right. Okay, so module 2, right, less in the first 2 columns, more here. Module 3, kind of spread all the way across, but definitely more so from the second column over than we were in the first module, where I was completely contained within these 2 columns, right? So moving from left to right as we go. Now here, much less going on this side, and most of my alignment is over here. Okay, so if I want to maybe check and see that each one of these course level objectives is being supported equally, then I can just go down the column and count how many X's I have, right? How many module objectives do I have supporting this first course objective? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, right? So 9 module level objectives supporting this one course level objective. Whereas for course objective 2, I have 1, 2, 3, 4, right? So that might be something where I want to go back and say, you know, hey, I either need to add some more module level objectives to support this, or maybe I've got too much focus on this, or I might decide that, hey, you know, this is where I want to be, right? Maybe these, excuse me, maybe these 4 module level objectives that I have supporting this are sufficient to support it. And maybe, you know, this needs all 9 to support it. That would be something that you would have to decide for yourself. Right? So that is the completion aspect of course alignment. Do I have all of my objectives at the course and module level, and do they support one another? Right, so now getting into more of the cohesion part, right? So this is, again, one of the resources that I've shared with you. You've got your Bloom's levels across the top, and then you've got your knowledge domains down the side, right? So, and this is one of the things that we talked more in depth about in the first session when we talked about creating creating learning objectives. So what I want to do now is to take my module level objectives, and you can do this with your course level objectives also, but again, this is just my process. You might like all of it and want to copy it exactly, or you might say, you know what, that does not really jive with the way I like to do things, and I don't want to use any of it. Or you might want to take pieces here and there and turn it into your own process. This is just the way that I chose to go about it. Okay, so you take your module level objectives, and you see I've kind of got mine color coded, right? So I can easily look at this and see anything in red is from module 1, anything in green is from module 2, anything in orange, module 3, and blue is module 4. All right, so the first thing I want you to notice is that there's a pretty decent spread from left to right, and less of a spread from top to bottom, which is fairly common, right? You want to make sure that you're hitting all 6 levels of blooms. Now, depending on the course content, you're going to be, from top to bottom, probably a bit more condensed than you are from left to right. So, for instance, in the course that I'm developing, there's a lot of theory. You've got learning theory, you've got student development theory, you've got instructional design models, you've got lots of conceptual things, right? So that makes sense that I would be very heavy in the conceptual knowledge domain. Now, this tells me that I probably don't have enough knowledge acquisition instruction going on, right? For me to be able to do the things here effectively, I probably am going to need a bit more of support from this top row here. And this also tells me that I don't have enough opportunities for students or learners in this case to engage with or put into practice the things that I'm doing up here, right? So there needs to be some more hands-on stuff, some more application type stuff where you actually get to take what you're learning with the conceptual side of things and put it into practice. The metacognitive is a entire session in and of itself, so we'll leave that alone for the time being. So now, once I've got these mapped, and going back to what I said earlier with the thinking in terms of evidence of assessment and instructional experiences, filling out this chart for me was the most influential part of this process. Right? So I have my module objective. I have where I classified it on this previous chart. Right? So 6B lets me know that this objective is in the create cognitive column and the conceptual knowledge column. Right, and it's a 6x4 matrix, so it's once you work with this enough, the 6B or 3A or whatever, you'll know exactly where that is on your chart. And another thing I want to point out, if you'll notice here, there's a lot of white out here. Okay, so all of these objective ones were initially here, and they all got moved to here. And I'll explain to you why. Because all of them say define, right? So define learning. I think the second one is define student development, and then define student engagement, and then define instructional design, which if you're at all familiar with Bloom's, then you know that this verb is very commonly associated with that first cognitive level, right? There's the verb right there. So when I saw, define, I just automatically put it there. But then when I got to this chart and I had to, elaborate on what it was that I really wanted out of this, which is I don't want them to look it up in a dictionary, right? What I want is for the student to be able to take the information that they've been given, along with their personal experiences, along with the experiences of other people that they learn through discussions, and I want them to form their own definition of learning, right? So to me, that's at a much higher cognitive level than simply looking up a definition in a book, right? And it didn't really occur to me until I sat down and said, okay, what's the evidence? What are they going to specifically show me that lets me know that they have achieved this objective, right? I want a quality definition where they're showing me the multi-dimensional nature of the term, right? And for each of these, I've given myself some things to look for, right? So I want multiple perspectives, mutual construction of knowledge. I want them to talk about transfer of knowledge within this definition, right? So, and this is going to give me, some ideas about, I had some holes here, right? Well, if this is what I'm going to be looking for in this definition, then when I go back to fill in up here, then these are the things I need to concentrate on if that's what I'm going to be looking for, right? And so the assessment for this, once I've defined my evidence, what I decided was, okay, I'm going to have them define learning at the beginning of the module, and then we'll go through the module. They'll get all the information, the PowerPoints, the discussions, the quizzes, the open response questions, all of that. And then the very last thing that they do in the module will be to define learning, right? So we do it once at the beginning and once at the end. And so that does a couple of things, right? That's an opportunity for self-reflection, right? I can, as a student, go back and look at my two different definitions and compare and contrast them and think, what caused me to change my mind, or maybe they're very similar, right? And nothing caused me to change my mind, and here's why. Here's why I'm sticking to what I originally believed. So, the evidence for me really lent itself to thinking about what I wanted them to do here, right? And I'm not going to go through and talk about all of these, but you can see, hopefully, how just conceptualizing it in a little bit of a different way lends itself to having assessment that really aligns itself to the objective, and then creating instructional experiences, creating learning experiences that prepare the students to be able to do the things that you're going to ask them to do, right? So that is the instructor course alignment chart, which again I shared with you. From there, and I think I'm running short on time, so I'll try to get through the rest of this rather quickly. So from there, we've got two more maps left. So now I take my assessments that I've come up with from the chart that I just showed you, right? And I map them to my module level objectives. So for each one of my assessments across the top, I say, all right, what objectives are these assessments going to measure, right? And then again, I can go down through here, and I haven't filled this out I guess I have. I can go down through here and for each objective go across and say, okay, well, if there's no X there, that's bad. That's your biggest red flag. You really can't have too many X's in this particular map, right? If every one of your assessments is measuring an objective, then you've done a pretty good job with that module and with coming up with good assessments. So then the last one that we have is mapping our instructional activities to our assessments. And this one is really kind of where the big picture, I guess because it's the last one, this is really kind of where we can go from here and then walk all the way back to the very beginning. So you've got your instructional activities across the top here, and then you've got your assessments coming down the side, right? So what I can do is I can, for each one of these assessments, I can come back here to the previous map, and I can say, all right, my Unit 1 quiz measures objective 1.1, 1.2, and 1.3, right? So I've got it labeled here, which objectives are measured with my assessment. And then this assessment has these instructional activities that are linked to it, right? So my video lecture and my soft chalk lesson are going to prepare my student for this assessment. This assessment measures module level objectives 1, 2, and 3. Module level objectives 1, 2, and 3 support course level objectives 1 and 2. Right? So once we get all 3 of these maps done, then I can fairly easily create some sort of chart that looks very similar to the one that I used just a few moments ago to give to my students, right? And maybe you want to give them this one, right? It might be that you want to give them this one, but you want to give them something that shows them, you know, these are the things that we're doing. These are the ways I'm going to assess you, and here's why we're doing it, right? Because here's the objectives that each one of those is going to meet, right? So with, you know, and I know that that's a lot of different maps and a lot of different templates going on there, but, you know, it's really not as much as what it seems like, especially when you get into it, right? So you've got, you know, the initial part of kind of creating the outline, then you classify your objectives, you go through and you decide what evidence you need to meet those objectives, and then you start mapping the things that you've already got, right? Once you get to this point, it's really just a matter of visually organizing what's already been done, right? So the activity that I had planned for the people here, for those of you that are attending virtually, and the reason that I told you to bring your syllabus was that I was going to have you, just a second here, let me get this stuff, get these resources. All right, so if you want to kind of, you know, immerse yourself in this just a little bit, see if maybe this is for you, then sit down with your syllabus and take the objectives for one module. Okay, I shared this with you in the zip file resources. So take the module level objectives from one module and classify them here, right? So put them somewhere on this chart, and you know, don't spend an inordinate amount of time trying to figure out where does it go on the chart, because once you get to the next step, which would be, okay, take each one of those objectives now and tell me what evidence you need to see that they have achieved that. Once you start going through this process, through this thought process, there's a good chance that you might come back to this and move some of them around, right? So keep some whiteout handy, or use a pencil. There's also within your resources file a chart that's identical to this one, except it's got a verb that fits each block, and then just some suggestions for learning activities that go along with each level of blooms. I also shared with you these lists of both instructional strategies and assessment strategies. So lots of resources at your disposal in the file that I shared with you. If for some reason you did not get that email that I'm referring to, or can't open some of the resources, or if you have any questions regarding any of the resources or the Understanding by Design framework in general, feel free to send me an email or give me a call, and I'll be happy to come by and talk about it with you. And it just occurred to me that we never went back to fill in that spot in the PowerPoint that I told you that we would. Okay, so this is the information that fills in those bullet points on your guided notes if you printed those out. So you've got your two domains of course alignment, completion, and cohesion, and for each one of these I've kind of listed the things that I did that we just kind of walked through in the tools and the templates that I used to accomplish each one of these things. So I appreciate you joining me today. Again, if you have any questions, concerns, comments, suggestions, feedback, I always welcome feedback. So feel free to reach out, email, phone call, what have you. That's it for today, and I will see you next time.